The glass behind my desk cracked before I even heard the sound that caused it. A thin line spreading across a window that was supposed to stop anything short of a starship cannon. I dropped to the floor out of instinct, my hands shaking, my heart slamming against my ribs so hard it hurt. Someone was trying to end my life, and this was not the first time this month. My name is Alina Ross, and 3 days earlier I had signed a contract that I did not fully understand. I did not know then that the man I hired to protect me was not simply skilled. He was something the rest of the galaxy had quietly agreed never to provoke. It started with money, or rather, the lack of it. My family's trading business had been targeted by a rival named Doran Vex, a cold and calculating operator who wanted my roots, my contracts, and eventually my company. The local guilds that once protected people like me had been bought out, one by one, until there was no one left I could trust. My usual protection had vanished overnight, replaced by silence and unanswered messages. I remember sitting in my office, staring at a list of names on a translucent screen, all from an agency that handled off-world contractors. Most of the names belonged to species I recognized. Strong builds, known reputations, expensive rates. Then there was one name near the bottom, listed under a species tag I had barely heard mentioned outside of old academic files. Human, Earth origin, availability, immediate, rate, surprisingly low. I almost skipped over it. Everyone knew humans were new to the wider galaxy, still finding their footing among older, more established civilizations. They were often described in soft, almost pitying terms. Short-lived, physically unremarkable, curious but harmless. I did not choose him because I believed in him. I chose him because I was desperate, and he was affordable, and desperate people rarely make careful decisions. His name was Ethan Cole. He arrived exactly on time, which surprised me more than it should have. He was tall, plainly dressed, with an unreadable calm expression that did not match the tension in my office. My assistant hovered nearby, nervous, glancing at the cracked window that maintenance had not yet repaired. Ethan barely looked at it. He looked at me instead, the way someone studies a problem they intend to solve. I explained the situation as clearly as I could, the failed guild contracts, the increasing attacks, the man behind it all. I expected him to ask about payment terms or working hours. Instead, he asked questions that unsettled me in a way I could not explain at the time. He asked what methods my attackers preferred. Did they favor long-range strikes or close confrontation? Did they work in groups or alone? He asked how quickly they escalated after a failed attempt, and whether they had ever targeted people close to me instead of me directly. His voice was calm the entire time, almost gentle, but his questions had the precision of someone building a mental map of danger. I remember answering slowly, unsure why these details mattered so much to him. When I finished, he simply nodded and said one sentence that stayed with me far longer than I expected. He said, "That sounds manageable." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the tension in my chest needed somewhere to go. Manageable. Someone had just tried to end my life through a reinforced window, and this man called it manageable. I signed the contract that same afternoon. I told myself it was because he was affordable and available immediately, not because something about his stillness had quietly convinced me he knew exactly what he was doing. Looking back now, I think some part of me sensed the truth before my mind was ready to accept it. The first days were strange in a way I could not quite name. Ethan did not behave like the guards I had known before. He did not stand rigidly at the door or announce his presence with heavy footsteps. He moved through my building like he already understood every hallway, every entrance, every place someone might hide. He asked for blueprints of my offices, my transport routes, even my sleeping quarters. He studied them for less than an hour before setting them aside, as if he had memorized every detail permanently. At night, I noticed he barely slept. When I asked him about it, he simply said that humans could manage on very little rest when necessary, and that his body had learned long ago how to stay alert. I did not question this further, though it left an odd feeling in my stomach. What kind of life taught a person to function like that? On the third night, everything changed. I was in my private office finishing a report when the lights flickered once, then dimmed to nothing. My heart jumped into my throat. Through the darkness, I heard boots against the floor, quiet but deliberate, coming from the corridor outside. I reached for the emergency signal on my desk, but before my fingers could touch it, Ethan appeared beside me, seemingly from nowhere. He placed a hand gently on my shoulder and told me to stay low and stay quiet. His voice held no fear at all, only calm instruction, as if this moment was something ordinary to him. Then he moved toward the door. I could not see much from where I crouched, but I heard everything. Muffled voices speaking in a language I recognized as belonging to Doran Vex's private enforcers. Then sudden movement, quick and controlled, followed by silence. Not long after, more voices entered, and again the same pattern repeated. Movement, brief resistance, then stillness. It took less than 2 minutes for the corridor to fall completely silent. When the lights flickered back on, Ethan stepped back into the office as though he had merely stepped out to check on something minor. Behind him, several armed intruders lay motionless on the floor, restrained and unconscious, their weapons scattered uselessly beside them. Nothing about the scene looked violent in the way I expected. It looked controlled, almost clinical, like watching someone solve a puzzle rather than face an emergency. I stared at him, unable to form words for a moment. My hands were still trembling, but his were completely steady. I finally managed to ask how he had done that so quickly, so quietly, without a single shot fired from his side. He looked at the intruders, then back at me, and said something that would echo in my mind for a long time afterward. He said that where he came from, this was considered a slow evening. I did not understand what he meant, not fully, not yet. I assumed it was simply a strange human expression, the kind of dry humor I had heard was common among his species. I laughed nervously and thanked him, and he simply nodded before securing the intruders for questioning, as calm as someone tidying a room after a long day. It was only later, alone in my room, with my heart finally slowing to a normal rhythm, that his words settled over me differently. A slow evening. I began to wonder exactly what an average evening looked like on his homeworld, and why the thought of finding out filled me with a mixture of curiosity and quiet unease. I did not know yet that this single event was only the beginning. I did not know that the calm way he handled danger was not simply skill built through training, but something shaped by an entire lifetime spent surviving conditions far beyond anything my world had ever known. All I knew, as I finally drifted toward an uneasy sleep, was that I had hired a bodyguard because he was affordable, and instead, I had unknowingly brought something far more dangerous than my enemies into my home. Something that the rest of the galaxy, whether they admitted it openly or not, had learned to quietly respect. And something told me, deep down, that Doran Vex had no idea what he had truly provoked. The following morning, I sat across from Ethan at a small table near the office kitchen, still trying to process everything that had happened the night before. Sunlight poured through the repaired window, and for a moment, everything looked ordinary again. Yet nothing about my situation felt ordinary anymore. I asked him directly this time. I wanted to know where he trained, which military unit had shaped him into someone capable of neutralizing armed intruders in under 2 minutes without a single serious injury on his side. I expected a name, a rank, perhaps a story about years of disciplined training in some elite human program. Instead, he simply said that he did not train for this. He grew up with it. I remember blinking at him, confused, waiting for him to continue. He did not elaborate immediately. He simply drank his coffee, calm as ever, as if the answer explained everything it needed to. I pressed further, asking what exactly he meant by growing up with it. He hesitated for the first time since I had met him, as though deciding how much to share. Then he said that Earth was not like most of the worlds I had encountered. He said it carefully, almost apologetically, like someone breaking difficult news gently. He explained that where he came from, the environment itself demanded constant awareness. Weather could shift violently within hours. Creatures far stronger than an average human roamed freely across large parts of the planet. Diseases evolved constantly, testing the limits of the human body in ways few other species had to endure. Even before considering conflicts between people, simply existing on Earth required a level of alertness that most species in the galaxy never needed to develop. I sat there quietly, absorbing this, unsure how much of it to believe. I had read basic information about Earth before, brief summaries provided through official interspecies records. Nothing in those records had prepared me for what he was describing now. He must have noticed my confusion, because he added something that unsettled me even further. He said that most of what the galaxy knew about Earth was intentionally simplified. Human representatives, in their early interactions with other species, had chosen to downplay certain details about their homeworld, fearing it might create unnecessary fear or suspicion among other civilizations. I asked him why that mattered so much. Why would revealing the truth about their environment cause fear? He looked at me then, calm but serious, and said that species who did not grow up under constant pressure often reacted strongly to species who did. He said it was easier for humans to be underestimated than feared, at least in the beginning, while they were still learning how the wider galaxy worked. I did not fully understand the weight of what he was telling me at the time. I simply nodded, filing the information away as another piece of the strange puzzle surrounding him. It would take more time, and more danger, before I truly understood exactly how much had been left unsaid. For now, all I knew was that the man sitting calmly across from me, sipping coffee as though the previous night meant nothing, had grown up in conditions that made ordinary danger feel almost restful to him. And somewhere out there, Doran Vex was likely already planning his next move, completely unaware that the person standing between him and his goal was not simply a hired bodyguard. He was a product of a world that never allowed anyone to feel truly safe. A death world. A week passed with no further attacks, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to believe things might finally settle. I was wrong to believe that, though I did not know it yet. I had a scheduled meeting at a neutral trade hall on the far side of the city, a public event meant to reassure my remaining business partners that my company was still stable despite recent troubles. Ethan insisted on reviewing the route beforehand, studying every entrance, every possible vantage point, every place a person could hide with a clear line toward the stage where I would be speaking. My assistant, a bright and nervous young woman named Grace Millar, thought his caution was excessive. She had worked with security teams before, and none of them had ever asked this many questions about a simple public appearance. I remember her whispering to me that morning, wondering if we were paying him for results or for worry. I did not have an answer for her then. I only knew that every instinct in me had started trusting Ethan more than I trusted my own judgment, even though I barely understood him. The trade hall was crowded when we arrived, filled with representatives from several allied companies, all curious to see whether I would appear strong or shaken after recent events. I forced a calm expression as I walked toward the stage, Ethan a few steps behind me, his eyes moving constantly across the room without ever appearing obvious about it. Halfway through my opening remarks, I noticed him shift his weight slightly, almost unnoticeable to anyone who was not paying close attention. I kept speaking, trusting him completely, though my pulse quickened. Later, he told me what had happened in those exact seconds. A figure near the upper balcony, dressed as event staff, had reached for something hidden beneath a folded cloth. Ethan recognized the motion instantly, the same motion he had studied 1,000 times during his life, the motion of someone preparing a long-range weapon. Before the figure could finish preparing, Ethan moved. He crossed the open floor faster than anyone in the room expected, faster than security personnel twice his size could react. He reached the balcony just as the figure attempted to aim, and within seconds the weapon was disarmed and the person restrained, all without a single shot fired, and without most of the crowd even realizing what had almost happened. I only learned the full details afterward, once we were safely back in my private transport. Grace sat across from us, pale and shaking, finally understanding why Ethan had asked so many careful questions before we ever left the building. She asked him quietly how he knew, how he had seen the danger before anyone else in the entire hall had noticed anything wrong. He answered simply, saying that where he came from, hesitation usually meant someone did not survive long enough to hesitate again. Grace did not respond to that. She simply looked at him differently after that moment, the same way I had begun looking at him myself. Not with fear exactly, but with a growing awareness that we had underestimated him from the very beginning. That evening, I received a message through an anonymous channel, one I recognized instantly despite the disguised sender information. It was from Doran Vex himself, and his tone had changed noticeably from previous communications. Where before he had been calculated and confident, now his message carried a subtle undertone of frustration. He wrote that my continued survival was becoming an inconvenience, and that whoever I had hired was proving more troublesome than expected. He warned that his patience was limited and that future attempts would not be handled by low-level operatives any longer. I read the message twice, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. I showed it to Ethan without a word, watching his expression carefully as he read it. He remained calm, as always, though something in his eyes sharpened slightly, like a person recalculating the size of a problem rather than fearing it. He told me that Vex's frustration was a good sign, not a bad one. He explained that people who still had confidence rarely revealed frustration this openly. Vex was beginning to feel pressure, and pressured people made mistakes. I asked him what kind of mistakes we should expect. He said that Vex would likely escalate quickly now, bringing in more capable forces, possibly even specialists from outside the local region. He said this without concern, almost as if he welcomed the idea of a greater challenge rather than fearing it. I remember staring at him, trying to understand how someone could react so calmly to the idea of facing something more dangerous. I asked him directly if he was ever afraid, even slightly, of what might come next. He considered the question for a long moment before answering. He said that fear was useful when it kept a person cautious, but dangerous when it clouded their thinking. He said his homeworld had taught him to recognize the difference early in life, because those who could not tell them apart rarely lived long enough to matter. That answer stayed with me long after our conversation ended. I began to realize that everything he said about Earth was not exaggeration or dramatic storytelling. It was simply his understanding of normal life, spoken as plainly as anyone might describe their morning routine. Over the following days, I noticed subtle changes in how Ethan prepared for each new threat. He began mapping wider areas around my properties, studying weather patterns, infrastructure weaknesses, and possible escape routes, with an intensity that suggested he expected something far larger than what we had already faced. Grace, despite her earlier nervousness, began working closely with him, learning quickly how to anticipate his instructions before he even finished speaking them. I found myself doing the same, adjusting my schedule around his warnings without questioning them anymore. One evening, while reviewing security footage from the trade hall incident, I asked him something that had been on my mind since our very first conversation. I asked him how many people back on Earth lived the way he did, constantly alert, constantly prepared for danger that could appear from any direction at any moment. He told me that most humans lived this way to some degree, though few realized it consciously. He explained that it was simply built into how humans were raised, shaped by generations who had faced constant threats long before recorded history began. He said that even in modern times, when technology had reduced many old dangers, the instincts remained deeply rooted, passed down instinctively from one generation to the next. I asked him if that made humans exhausted, living with that level of awareness at all times. He smiled faintly, the first genuine smile I had seen from him since we met, and said that humans had simply learned to carry it quietly, the same way a person carries the weight of an old habit they no longer notice. That night, after Ethan and Grace had both left for their quarters, I sat alone reviewing everything that had happened since hiring him. The failed assassination attempts, the calm efficiency with which he neutralized every threat, the strange, unsettling glimpses into a homeworld that sounded less like a place people lived and more like a constant test of survival. I began to understand, slowly but clearly, that I had not simply hired protection when I signed that contract. I had unknowingly brought something into my life that the wider galaxy had barely begun to understand, something shaped by conditions far harsher than anything most species had ever faced. Doran Vex believed he was dealing with a single skilled bodyguard standing between him and his goals. He had no idea that he was, in reality, testing the patience of an entire species that had learned, through countless generations of hardship, exactly how to survive when survival itself was never guaranteed. And judging by the tone of his most recent message, that patience was about to be tested even further. The following morning, I decided I needed to understand more than what Ethan casually mentioned over coffee. I wanted facts, records, something official that could explain the strange calm behind his eyes whenever danger appeared. I accessed the Central Information Archive that most trading companies used for basic species research, searching for anything related to Earth and its people. What I found at first was almost laughably thin, a short entry describing Earth as a temperate world with varied climates, home to a single dominant species that had only recently achieved interstellar contact. There were notes about human curiosity, their quick adoption of new technology, and a brief mention of their diverse cultures. Nothing in the summary suggested anything unusual about their environment or their history. I mentioned this to Ethan later that day, telling him how ordinary the official records made his homeworld sound. He listened quietly, then asked me who had written those records. I admitted I did not know. He said that was exactly the point. He explained that the earliest human representatives who made contact with other species understood something crucial almost immediately. Other civilizations reacted with unease whenever conversations turned toward Earth's natural conditions. Rather than risk being isolated or treated with suspicion before they had even begun building relationships, human diplomats chose to simplify their own history when speaking with outsiders. Over time, this simplified version became the accepted record, repeated so often that even other humans sometimes forgot how much had been left out. I asked him why revealing the truth would cause such unease. He paused, considering his words carefully, then asked if I truly wanted to understand, or if I simply wanted reassurance. I told him I wanted the truth, however uncomfortable it might be. He nodded slowly and began to explain, speaking with the same calm tone he used when disarming a threat, as though this conversation required the same kind of steady control. He told me that Earth was home to creatures far larger and stronger than any human, animals capable of ending a human life in moments if caution was ever forgotten. He said these creatures were not rare exceptions confined to distant corners of the planet. They existed across nearly every region, adapted to oceans, forests, mountains, and even areas close to where large human populations lived. He described how human children were taught from a very young age to recognize warning signs in their surroundings, subtle changes in an environment that could mean the difference between safety and serious danger. He said this awareness became so deeply ingrained that most humans carried it their entire lives without ever consciously thinking about it, the same instinct that had allowed him to notice a hidden weapon from across a crowded room without any specific training in that exact scenario. He spoke about diseases as well, describing how Earth's environment constantly produced new illnesses capable of spreading quickly among large populations. He explained that human bodies had developed remarkably adaptive immune systems as a direct result, simply because those without such resilience rarely survived long enough to continue their family lines. He said this was not something unique to a distant era of human history. Even in recent generations, humans regularly faced new illnesses that required rapid scientific response to prevent widespread harm. I found myself unable to speak for a long moment, trying to reconcile this description with the calm, steady man sitting across from me. He continued, almost gently now, as though sensing my growing unease. He told me about Earth's weather, how certain regions experience sudden and violent shifts capable of destroying entire structures within minutes, storms that could level buildings, extreme temperatures that could threaten survival within hours without proper shelter. He said humans had learned to build their lives around unpredictability, treating stability as something to be prepared for losing at any moment rather than something to take for granted. I asked him, quietly, how any species could develop advanced civilization while facing conditions like these. He smiled slightly, though there was no humor in it, only a kind of quiet pride. He said that facing constant challenge did not prevent progress. It shaped it. Humans learned cooperation not because it was easy, but because survival often depended on it. Communities formed early in human history, not simply for companionship, but because a single person facing Earth's conditions alone rarely lasted long. He said this need for cooperation eventually built into complex societies, then civilizations, then eventually into the species capable of reaching beyond their own world entirely. I asked him about human history beyond the natural environment, curious whether humans had also faced significant conflict among themselves. He grew quieter here, choosing his words with visible care. He explained that human history included long periods of conflict between different groups, driven by competition over resources, territory, and differing beliefs. He said this was not something humans were proud of, but it was part of their story nonetheless, and it had taught hard lessons about strategy, resilience, and the true cost of underestimating an opponent. He said many of the skills he used now, the awareness, the calm under pressure, the ability to recognize danger quickly, were shaped as much by that difficult history as by the natural challenges of the planet itself. I sat with this information for a long time after our conversation ended, trying to process just how much had been hidden behind Earth's simplified public record. I began searching further, digging through older academic archives that were rarely accessed by casual researchers. Eventually, I found a document buried deep within a restricted section, written decades earlier by an alien researcher who had spent time studying early human interactions. The document was cautious in tone, clearly written by someone trying to remain professional despite an obvious undertone of concern. The researcher described observing a brief encounter between a human survey team and a group of local wildlife during an early exploratory mission. The account was careful and clinical, avoiding dramatic language, yet it conveyed clear astonishment at how calmly the human team handled a situation the researcher described as immediately life-threatening. The document ended with a simple, almost hesitant recommendation, suggesting that future interactions with humans should proceed with careful respect, given how casually they seemed to handle circumstances other species would consider extreme. I brought this document to Ethan the next day, showing him the passage in question. He read it quietly, then nodded, unsurprised. He told me that incidents like this were part of why certain older civilizations treated humans with quiet caution, even while publicly maintaining polite, neutral relationships. He said it was rarely discussed openly, but many species who had encountered humans directly during difficult situations came away with a similar understanding, one that rarely matched the simplified public image most people were used to. I asked him if this meant other species were afraid of humans. He considered the question carefully before answering. He said fear was not quite the right word. He said most experienced species had learned instead to treat humans the way careful travelers treated an unpredictable, powerful force of nature. Not with constant fear, but with steady, permanent respect, understanding that pushing too far could reveal capabilities most people preferred never to witness firsthand. That evening, I found myself standing near the same window that had cracked during the very first attack against me. It had been repaired seamlessly, showing no trace of what had happened there. I thought about how easily surface appearances could hide deeper truths whether in a window, a species, or a person standing quietly beside me through every danger I had faced. I thought about Doran Vex as well, wondering whether he had access to any of the information I had just uncovered, whether he understood, even slightly, the true nature of the man standing between him and his goals. Something told me he did not, or perhaps he simply refused to believe it, the same way I had refused to believe it during our very first meeting. Grace found me there later, quietly staring out at the city lights beyond the glass. She asked if everything was all right, noticing the distant look on my face. I told her I had learned more about Ethan's homeworld that day than I had expected to learn in an entire lifetime. She asked, half joking, whether I regretted hiring him now that I understood more about where he came from. I remember answering honestly, without hesitation. I told her that if anything, I finally understood why he remained so calm through every danger we had faced so far. Compared to what he must have grown up with, our current troubles likely felt almost manageable to him, just as he had described from our very first conversation. Grace considered this for a long moment, before speaking again. She asked what would happen if Doran Vex ever sent something capable of truly testing him, something beyond what a calm, controlled response could easily manage. I did not have an answer for her that night. I only knew, deep down, that we were about to find out far sooner than either of us expected. 3 days later, Doran Vex made his next move, and it arrived with a scale that made every previous attempt look like a simple warning shot. I woke before dawn to the sound of my private alarm system triggering across the entire estate, a sound I had never heard activate at full strength before. Lights flooded the hallway outside my room, and within seconds, Ethan appeared at my door, already dressed, already alert, his expression sharper than I had ever seen it. He told me, calmly but firmly, that this was not a small operation. Multiple entry points across the estate had triggered sensors simultaneously, meaning whoever was coming had brought enough numbers to attempt several approaches at once. He instructed me to stay close to Grace, remain in the reinforced inner room we had prepared weeks earlier, and trust that he would handle whatever came through the outer perimeter. For the first time since I had known him, I saw something shift behind his eyes. It was not fear, it was focus, deep and absolute, the kind of stillness that came right before someone committed fully to a serious task. Grace and I moved quickly to the inner room as instructed, sealing the reinforced door behind us. Through the security monitors mounted along the wall, I watched as armed figures moved across the estate grounds, more than I had seen in any previous attempt combined. These were not the same disorganized operatives from before. Their movements were coordinated, professional, clearly experienced in handling difficult targets. I felt my chest tighten as I searched the monitors for Ethan, finally spotting him near the main garden entrance, standing perfectly still as the first wave of intruders approached. Grace gripped my arm tightly beside me, both of us watching in tense silence. What happened next unfolded faster than I could properly track through the grainy monitor feed. Ethan moved with an efficiency that felt almost inhuman, using the garden's layout, the uneven terrain, and even the darkness itself to his advantage. Intruders who expected an open confrontation found themselves disoriented within seconds, their coordinated approach collapsing into confusion as Ethan seemed to appear and disappear between positions faster than their formation could adjust. One by one, figures fell to the ground, restrained rather than seriously harmed, though clearly no longer capable of continuing their assault. I noticed something different in how Ethan handled this wave compared to previous encounters. There was less patience in his movements, more direct intent, as though he understood this was not a moment for careful restraint, but for swift, decisive resolution. Grace whispered beside me, asking if this was truly the same person we had been working with over these past weeks. I did not answer immediately, too transfixed by what I was witnessing to form words. The first wave was neutralized within minutes, but the monitors showed a second group approaching from the estate's eastern boundary, larger and better equipped than the first. Among them, I noticed something unusual, a tall figure moving differently from the rest, calm and deliberate in a way that reminded me uncomfortably of Ethan himself. I later learned this figure belonged to a species occasionally hired for situations requiring exceptional physical capability, a species some regions of the galaxy had once considered among the most dangerous available for hire, prior to widespread human involvement in interstellar affairs. Doran Vex had clearly decided that ordinary forces were no longer sufficient. Ethan noticed this figure as well. Through the monitor, I watched him pause briefly, studying the approaching group with careful attention before adjusting his position. For the first time, he seemed to be measuring an opponent rather than simply reacting to one. The confrontation that followed was unlike anything I had witnessed before. The specialized hunter moved with impressive speed and strength, clearly capable of handling most opponents with ease. Yet Ethan matched him step for step, using precise timing and calculated positioning rather than raw physical force, turning the hunter's own momentum against him repeatedly. At one point, the hunter managed to gain a brief advantage, forcing Ethan backward toward a stone wall near the garden's edge. My breath caught in my throat as I watched, fearing the moment had finally arrived where his calm confidence would meet its limit. Instead, Ethan used the wall itself as leverage, redirecting the hunter's next approach with a controlled, precise motion that ended the confrontation decisively. The hunter collapsed to the ground, no longer capable of continuing, while Ethan stood over him for a long moment, breathing steady despite the intensity of what had just occurred. He said something to the defeated hunter that the monitor's audio barely captured, quiet and controlled, yet carrying unmistakable weight. He told him to inform whoever sent him that Doran Vex had significantly misjudged what he was dealing with, and that continuing this path would only lead to greater loss for those involved. The remaining intruders, witnessing their strongest asset defeated so completely, retreated quickly from the estate grounds, disappearing into the darkness beyond the perimeter sensors. Within 20 minutes of the alarm first triggering, the entire threat had been neutralized. When Ethan finally returned to the inner room where Grace and I waited, his expression had shifted back toward its usual calm, though something behind his eyes remained sharper than before, as though a switch had been flipped that had not yet fully returned to its resting position. I asked him quietly what exactly the specialized hunter had been, and why Doran Vex would choose to bring in someone from that particular background. Ethan explained that this species had once held a certain reputation across parts of the galaxy, known for taking on difficult contracts that other groups avoided. He said that reputation had existed long before humans became widely involved in interstellar affairs, and that many species still associated exceptional danger with names like this one, rather than considering more recently arrived species as a genuine threat. I asked him directly whether Doran Vex now understood what he was truly facing. Ethan considered the question seriously before answering. He said Vex likely understood only that his resources were being consumed faster than expected, without yet grasping the deeper reason behind each failure. He said people rarely updated their understanding of danger until they were forced to directly, and Vex had not yet reached that point. I asked him what would happen when Vex finally did reach that point. Ethan's expression grew momentarily distant, as though recalling something from long ago, something shaped by lessons learned far earlier in his life than anything related to his current profession. He told me that when someone finally understood the true scale of what they were dealing with, they typically responded in one of two ways. Either they withdrew entirely, recognizing the cost of continuing was no longer worth whatever they hoped to gain, or they escalated dramatically, throwing everything they had into one final, desperate effort before accepting defeat. I asked him which outcome he expected from Vex. He looked at me directly, his voice steady and certain, in a way that left no room for doubt. He said that men like Vex rarely chose the wise option first. He said we should prepare for one final, significant confrontation, likely larger than anything we had faced so far, because Vex would want to prove to himself and to those watching that his earlier failures were simply bad fortune rather than a genuine mismatch in capability. Grace asked quietly, whether we could survive something on that scale. Ethan's answer came without hesitation, calm and absolute, in a way that somehow reassured me more than any previous reassurance he had offered. He said that surviving was never truly the question in his mind. The only real question was how quickly he could ensure Vex understood, beyond any doubt, exactly what mistake he had made in choosing to continue this conflict at all. I remember sitting quietly after that conversation, watching the sun slowly rise over the estate grounds through the reinforced windows, painting the damaged garden in soft early light. The peaceful scene felt strangely disconnected from what had just occurred there hours earlier. I thought about everything I had learned since hiring Ethan, the calm efficiency behind every action, the deep, quiet history of a homeworld that demanded constant awareness simply to survive, the controlled restraint he showed, even while facing genuine danger, restraint that I now understood came not from weakness, but from an entire species choosing to hold back far more than they ever revealed. I thought about Doran Vex as well, likely receiving reports at that very moment about his failed operation, still not fully understanding the true nature of what continued to stand against him. Something told me that whatever came next would finally force that understanding upon him, whether he was ready to accept it or not. 5 days later, Doran Vex made his final move, and this time he chose to reveal himself directly. I received a formal message, no longer hidden behind anonymous channels, inviting me to a public negotiation at a neutral meeting hall used by regional trade authorities. The message claimed he wished to resolve our conflict through proper business discussion, citing the damage recent events had caused to both our companies. I knew immediately this was not a genuine offer of peace. Ethan agreed without hesitation. He explained that Vex likely intended to use the public setting as cover for one final, decisive attempt, calculating that heavy security around a neutral meeting hall would either force us into a vulnerable position or provide enough chaos to mask his true intentions. Rather than avoid the meeting, Ethan suggested we attend deliberately, using the structured setting to our advantage instead of walking blindly into whatever trap awaited us. Grace worked alongside him for 2 full days, preparing every detail, studying the meeting hall's layout, identifying entry points, and coordinating with a small number of trusted contacts who owed me favors from years of honest business dealings. I watched the two of them work together with growing confidence, no longer questioning every decision the way I once had. On the day of the meeting, I arrived at the neutral hall wearing formal attire that did little to calm the tension building steadily in my chest. Ethan walked beside me, dressed plainly, as always, his expression calm but alert, scanning every detail of the surrounding area the moment we stepped through the entrance. Doran Vex waited near the center of the hall, surrounded by several well-dressed associates, his expression carrying the practiced confidence of someone accustomed to controlling every room he entered. He greeted me with exaggerated politeness, gesturing toward a prepared table as though this truly was a simple business discussion. I sat across from him, keeping my expression neutral despite the unease twisting through my stomach. Ethan remained standing slightly behind me, positioned in a way that gave him clear view of the entire hall without appearing overly aggressive to onlookers, unaware of the tension beneath the surface. Vex began speaking about trade routes, compensation, and future cooperation, his tone smooth and rehearsed. I let him continue for several minutes, watching carefully for any sign of what Ethan had warned me to expect. It came sooner than I anticipated. A subtle signal passed between several of Vex's associates, positioned near the hall's outer edges, followed immediately by a coordinated movement toward the exits, sealing the room's main pathways. Vex's polite expression shifted instantly into something colder, confirming everything Ethan had predicted. He addressed me directly now, dropping all pretense of genuine negotiation. He said that he had grown tired of losing resources to a single hired bodyguard, and that today he intended to end this conflict permanently, regardless of the public setting surrounding us. I felt fear rise sharply in my chest, but beside me, Ethan remained completely calm, as though he had expected this exact moment from the very beginning. He stepped forward slightly, positioning himself directly between me and Vex's gathered associates. He spoke calmly, his voice carrying clearly across the now tense hall. He told Vex that everything happening today had already been anticipated, and that Vex's decision to escalate this far, in a setting filled with witnesses from across the region, would ultimately prove to be his greatest mistake yet. Vex laughed, though the sound carried less confidence than he likely intended. He gestured toward his gathered forces, easily outnumbering the handful of allies Ethan and Grace had arranged beforehand. He said numbers alone would settle this matter quickly. Ethan's response was calm, measured, and utterly certain. He said that numbers had never truly been the deciding factor in any confrontation he had faced since arriving here, and today would be no different. What followed unfolded with a precision that left the entire hall in stunned silence. Ethan moved first, disabling the nearest threat before Vex's forces fully realized the confrontation had begun. Grace, positioned near a side entrance with our trusted contacts, moved simultaneously to secure the exits Vex's associates had attempted to seal, preventing any possibility of retreat or reinforcement. Vex's remaining forces, clearly unprepared for coordinated resistance on this level, found themselves quickly overwhelmed. Ethan handled each confrontation with calculated efficiency, using the hall's furniture, structure, and open spaces exactly as he had studied beforehand, ensuring every advantage remained firmly in our favor. Within minutes, every one of Vex's associates had been neutralized and restrained, leaving him standing alone near the center table, his earlier confidence completely gone. He looked around the hall in disbelief, seeing his entire operation dismantled in front of numerous witnesses from across the regional trade community. Ethan approached him slowly, his expression calm but unmistakably serious. He told Vex that everything he had witnessed today represented only a fraction of what could have happened, had restraint not been carefully chosen throughout this entire conflict. He explained that humans, despite their relatively recent arrival among the wider galactic community, came from a world that demanded resilience far beyond what most species ever needed to develop, and that choosing calm control over unnecessary escalation was a decision, not a limitation. Vex, finally understanding the true scale of his miscalculation, said nothing in response, his expression shifting from anger to something closer to quiet realization. The witnesses present that day, representatives from various trade companies across the region, quickly spread word of what had occurred, and within days, the story had reached far beyond our local community. Doran Vex's reputation collapsed entirely, his remaining business partners withdrawing support once news of his actions became widely known. Regional trade authorities opened a formal investigation into his conduct, effectively ending his influence within our industry. For the first time in months, I found myself finally able to breathe without constant fear shadowing every decision I made. My company began stabilizing quickly, former partners returning once they understood the true nature of what had transpired. Grace, who had grown remarkably capable throughout this entire ordeal, took on a permanent role overseeing security coordination for my company, working closely alongside Ethan whenever new challenges arose. I found myself grateful daily for both of them, understanding now how close I had come to losing everything before their combined efforts turned the situation around. One evening, several weeks after the confrontation with Vex, I sat with Ethan on the same balcony where I once watched a cracked window catch the morning light. The estate around us had fully recovered, gardens restored, security systems quietly humming in the background, a peaceful contrast to everything we had faced together. I asked him, finally, what he thought of everything that had happened since he first arrived. He considered the question for a long moment before answering, his tone thoughtful rather than guarded. He said that this entire experience had reminded him of something important, something occasionally easy to forget while adjusting to life among calmer worlds. He said that the instincts shaped by his homeworld, the awareness, the calm control, the willingness to act decisively when truly necessary, remained valuable regardless of where he found himself. I asked him if he ever missed Earth, given everything he had described about its harsh conditions. He smiled faintly, the same genuine smile I had seen only rarely since we first met. He said that despite everything, Earth remained home, shaped by both its challenges and the resilience those challenges had built within its people. He said humans rarely spoke about it openly among other species, not out of shame, but simply because most people preferred being underestimated rather than feared, at least until circumstances required otherwise. I asked him if he intended to stay, now that the immediate danger had passed. He looked out over the restored gardens for a long moment before answering. He said he saw no reason to leave, especially now that our working relationship had grown into something built on genuine trust rather than simple necessity. He said he had grown to respect both myself and Grace throughout this experience, and that respect, once earned, was not something he took lightly. I offered him a permanent position that evening, one far beyond simple contract work, and he accepted without hesitation. Word of our confrontation with Doran Vex continued spreading throughout regional trade circles over the following months, and slowly, subtly, I began noticing a shift in how other companies approached security decisions of their own. Where humans had once been viewed as harmless newcomers within the wider galactic community, quiet conversations began circulating instead, cautious and respectful, about the surprising depth of capability hidden behind their calm, unassuming presence. Other companies began seeking human contractors specifically, no longer viewing them as an affordable alternative, but as a serious, capable choice built on quiet, earned reputation. I often thought back to that very first day, sitting in my office, reviewing a list of names, choosing Ethan simply because he was affordable and available immediately. I never could have imagined then how profoundly that single decision would reshape my understanding of an entire species, nor how deeply grateful I would become for the calm, controlled strength that had walked quietly into my life during its most dangerous moment. Doran Vex, wherever he ended up after losing everything he once controlled, likely never fully understood the true nature of what he had provoked that day. He believed, until the very end, that he was simply facing a skilled bodyguard standing in his way. He never realized he had been testing the patience of an entire world, one that had learned long ago exactly how much strength could remain quietly hidden beneath calm, steady control until the moment finally came when holding back was no longer necessary. And across the wider galaxy, slowly but surely, that same quiet lesson continued spreading from one cautious conversation to the next, carried forward by every person who had witnessed, firsthand, exactly what happened when someone finally pushed too far against a species shaped by a world that never once allowed anyone to feel completely safe.
I never thought about putting bacon in a sausage roll. But it doesn't have bacon pieces, it just tastes bacony. I wonder if they've like minced it really fine, or maybe they've minced the bacon into the actual sausage mince. It's really good. I'm gonna do that next time. Crumbs everywhere. Alright. Oh look! Safety! You haven't seen this sorcerer outfit? It's one of the free ones you got with... It's really cool. She's fucking buff. Look at the ab definition. This one came from one of the Ooh, I haven't got these yet. One of the seals. These look different. It's one of these outfit boxes. Portable cheese grater. Yeah. Booba. Abs! I know. I want abs so bad. I don't know how to get some of these point things. I think I might have been catching these, actually. This must be what I was getting. So every time I catch a fish, I'm getting this event thing pop up and I'm like, what is that? Where's the item going? It's this. It must be this. Hi, Garly. How are you? Yeah, so there's these, you can get premium outfit boxes, thankful ones, and I think that's what I got it from. It's gone now though, the actual thing, so good thing I bought all the things I needed. There's so many. Surely it's still there somewhere. No, it's not. There's a new one now. I don't know what this is for. Dreamer seal. Dreamy butterfly box. Does this have an outfit? I'm obsessed with outfits. Premium outfit box 50? You could get 50 premium outfit boxes if you're lucky. Probably just get the Cron Stone. If I wanted abs like that, I would need to stop drinking cola. You would. If you scroll down, there is a fish currency too. Is there? Where? Oh, these? Imperial fishing.